In 2017, the new It movie took everybody by storm and was praised as one of the best Stephen King adaptations in a decade, and may have even inspired all of the infamous clown sightings of 2016. But then the sequel came out and everybody appeared rather disappointed, and all of the excitement the first one had generated seemingly dissipated almost overnight. Sure, certain aspects of it were praised, but many felt it couldn't recapture the magic of the first movie. And today I'd like to go over why I believe that is, and specifically what the first movie got right that the sequel didn't. But before we get started, I would just like to warn you that there will be minor spoilers ahead, so in case there's anything you don't want ruined, you might just want to be on the lookout. This will be your one and only warning. Okay, so to get right into it, I can sum up exactly where It Chapter 2 went wrong in one word: comedy. This movie is trying way too hard to be funny, and it's to the detriment of the story. Because here's the thing: Stephen King wrote It as what's known as a cosmic horror story, and in case you don't know what that is, think H.P. Lovecraft. And if you don't know what that means, cosmic horror is basically a genre of horror that focuses on threats from either outer space or the intangible, with the villains usually being either aliens, monsters, or demons, or any combination thereof. Basically, most of the scares in these types of stories come from the fact that both the audience and the characters really don't have any idea or only a vague idea of what they're up against. In essence, preying on our fears of the unknown and what may be out there. And needless to say, the stakes are usually absurdly high as well, though that's not a requirement of them. And I'm pretty sure that anybody can agree it most definitely fits the bill here, since Pennywise is an alien demon who takes on the form of people's worst fears in order to eat them. And the thing is, comedy does not fit well in this genre. Really, cosmic horror is one of the scariest genres out there, so needless to say, the humor in them is usually non existent. And It Chapter 2 is the perfect example of why it should stay that way. Because simply put, the whole point of any horror movie is to scare people. And if the characters and even the villain are running around trying to make the audience laugh, either through their quips or through their actions, why should the audience be scared? If the movie isn't treating itself seriously, why should the people watching it? Because simply put, the constant attempts at jokes and humor sucks most of the tension out of the movie, and frankly makes it feel pretty weird at that. Because one moment you've got the characters freaking out over the very real threat they have to face, and then the next are trying to make us laugh with that very same freak out. Now, don't get me wrong, there is a right way to do something like that, but the way this movie does it is not it. Now, I know you might be thinking, but you said yourself that the first It was a huge success, and that had plenty of funny moments in it, and that is most definitely true. But the difference is that the first movie commits a lot more to the horror. Most of the humor comes from teenagers acting like normal teenagers, and particularly Richie's jokester nature. Basically, the comedy feels completely natural and only comes from the characters directly. But most importantly, it never gets in the way of the horror, and Pennywise in particular. Anytime he shows up in the movie, he's treated dead seriously and immediately drops any humor there may have been in the scene. And that's honestly the mark of a great villain, no matter the genre. The ability to make the audience scared just by their mere presence. And that's exactly what Pennywise does in the first movie. He may have only about 4 or 5 minutes of screen time, but for every second of it, you feel absolutely terrified of him. In other words, Pennywise and the threat he poses are played dead seriously, and as a result, the audience is horrified by him. Now, the problem in It Chapter 2 is that he's played for comedy just as often as he is for horror, which makes him feel like less of a threat as the consequence. And at the same time, the character's fear of him is constantly played for laughs as opposed to the first movie where their absolute fear of him is played completely straight, which once again makes the whole thing feel a lot less serious. And to demonstrate my point here, let's compare a similar scene from both movies to each other. Specifically, both times they go into the old house above the sewers. In the first movie, everything is tense from the start, and when Richie finds the newspaper saying he died that same day, his freakout only makes everything even more nervous. Then strange things start happening, Eddie gets knocked out, and Pennywise starts outright toying with them. And it's all horrifying to have to sit through. Then, when he finally does make his presence known, tensions boil over as he taunts Richie and then Eddie. Beverly stabs him with the fence post, and it looks like he's going to go completely savage before instead opting to retreat. Now, what's my point here? That nothing in this scene is played for comedy. This scene is nothing but pure horror throughout, and it's absolutely nerve-wracking to watch as a result. Now, contrast this with the sequel. Here, the Stan head is played for a joke more than once, and the horror of Ben having words carved out in his stomach ends up mitigated when he takes out his pain on the head, playing his repeatedly stabbing at it for laughs rather than as him desperately wanting to end the constant fear and torture that plagues him. Basically, the constant jokes kill the tension of the scene, and it was the fact that even the wisecracking Richie was absolutely terrified in the first movie that helped make that scene work so well. Now, don't get me wrong, it's okay for horror movies to have moments of levity. In fact, some would even say that it's encouraged under the right circumstances. But the thing is, it has to only be a couple of jokes put in at the right moment, as otherwise you risk undercutting all the horror in the process. Because again, if the characters and writers aren't taking their situation seriously, why should we? As I just pointed out, whereas the first movie used its jokes more sparingly and knew when to get serious, the second movie almost feels like a corruption of The Evil Dead 2. And on that topic, it doesn't work as a horror comedy either, because the movie is trying to be a straight horror movie with a dose of humor mixed in. And the result is that the audience doesn't feel the same level of horror and might even end up a bit confused because the movie's tone is all over the place. Because when you really look at it, most of the best horror movies out there don't have too many funny moments in them. And one of the best examples of this is The Shining, because I don't know if there's a single joke in the entire movie. Honestly, Stanley Kubrick was the perfect director for a horror movie because he knew how to build the tension. And because there's almost no levity to be had, it makes the stakes feel all the more real, the horror completely genuine, and make the audience absolutely dread what's going to happen next. And this is perhaps most evident with Jack's descent into madness. For instance, take his mocking, as soon as possible. In any other movie, that would be a moment of levity. Here it's terrifying. Why is that? Because Kubrick presents him on screen exactly how a person would perceive him if he existed in the real world. In other words, most writers would treat a character like him as funny and deliberately exaggerate his demeanor and downplay his menace in order to achieve that. But instead, Kubrick has Nicholson portray him as grounded as possible with his over-the-top nature as a display of his mental state, and then basically asks the audience, how would you feel if you were alone with this man? essentially putting them right into Wendy's mindset at that moment. And the result is a feeling of bottomless dread for an insane, evil, and remorseless axe murderer. It doesn't matter if he's having the time of his life and Nicholson is chewing the scenery like a stick of gum. The audience knows what this man will do if let loose, and they're absolutely terrified of it. Though what also helps in this case is Kubrick's use of music, which also does a great job of conveying to the audience exactly how unstable Jack is, and really helps you feel the terror of the movie's more horrifying moments. But It Chapter 2 instead tried to copy Marvel's use of quips and jokes and completely destroyed the tension in the process. And as I've already repeatedly emphasized, unless you are deliberately trying to write a horror comedy, any horror writer should know that you stay away from the jokes when you want the audience to feel scared. Because again, comedy and horror are basically opposites of each other, as they make the audience feel two completely different things. And like I said before, it's okay to have moments of levity in a horror movie, but It Chapter 2 goes way overboard. And the result is a villain that's not as scary as he could have been, stakes that don't feel as high as they should, and perhaps most importantly for horror movie lovers, not all that many genuine scares to be had, and the underlying fear constantly broken and interrupted as well. Now, of course, It Chapter 2 did suffer from a few other problems as well, especially all of those flashbacks that don't serve any purpose to the larger story, but the comedy is where I feel they really went wrong. Now, keep in mind I am no writing expert, as I have freely admitted many times, but as a man who's written a horror book or two myself, I honestly don't know what they were thinking. If you ask me, they were just trying way too hard to duplicate the success of the first movie, as well as copy Marvel's style in an attempt to appeal to a wider audience. And the result is a tonal and narrative mess. Though the movie does have its moments, yes, but I still believe that its greatest achievement is perhaps demonstrating why most horror movies out there don't really have too many jokes in them. Because that allows the audience to be more focused on them killing the characters as opposed to killing the tension. Alright, I think that's everything I wanted to cover. So now I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think that It Chapter 2 suffered from having too much comedy in it, or do you believe it was a good movie and its humor was perfectly placed? Please feel free to let me know in the comments. And remember, it's okay if you disagree with me and believe I'm dead wrong. I don't have any issue with that. Thank you all for watching. I very much appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.